Hello everyone, this is David with the Reformed Apologist channel. This video is a follow-up from my previous video from a while back, and that video was the one where I involved Bearded Sovereign Grace, also known as All for His Glory Alone, my video being entitled Intro and Discussion over Satan's Name in the Bible. In particular, I meant in Old Testament Hebrew. And I was trying to be fairly impartial and just give Mr. James there some wiggle room to run with the topic. It's not that I was myself uncertain or not certain about what I thought about it. It is that I just wanted to leave some room open for discussion on the topic. It seemed to be an interesting topic. We found two different books that were saying two different opposite things. And let me just say up front, I do tend to take the Maury stance, but after having emailed with Robert Maury before his passing, I know that I don't say it exactly like him. It's too complicated to say in one fell swoop. Suffice to say that you can say that Satan was a character, a real person throughout the whole Bible, and he is being talked about in several places in the Old Testament, even when you consider the Hebrew grammar constructs that occur. So, that being said, let me give a couple more pieces of specific detail here. I've been concerned about just church divisions and splits and arguments going on in church. I saw the recent New York Times article, which is entitled "Can Black Evangelicals Save the Whole Movement?" I know that goes into race issues and stuff. When people start thinking about the DNA, the offspring, where everyone come from and stuff, you're treading on a territory that's just not worth disputing. But the scriptures say, "For there is no distinction now, Jew or Greek." Anyway, so going back to the topic at hand. Bob Moore's book was called Satan's Devices, and he says the name for the devil, Satan, appears 53 times in the scriptures. He says it is the favorite name of the devil throughout the entire Bible. Michael Heiser says in The Unseen Realm that the word Satan is not a proper personal pronoun in the Old Testament. He says that conclusion of Old Testament scholars that Satan is not a proper personal name in the Old Testament is driven by Hebrew grammar. And, okay, now, end quote. The people that support that the people who are Heiser fans that got really far into that point of view, it seemed to me they're beginning to abandon a very sound method of exegesis and interpretation, which is called the historical grammatical method, and they're merely favoring only a grammatical way of looking at things, where they were only looking at what was going on in the Hebrew language in the Old Testament, and abandoning everything else. We're supposed to be interpreting scripture with scripture, looking at the other places in the Bible that are relevant, and then we're supposed to be considering the cultural context. We're supposed to understand that the Bible has progressive revelation. It's not a systematic theology book. They're just the people supporting that side only, where they're not only just reading Heiser for his insight, they're also fully in support of the position. They're being too wooden and literal in Hebrew grammar. They're supposed to be applying the historical grammatical approach to interpretation. So they're supposed to understand both that the Hebrew says Hasatan in some places, and it does mean adversary and Satan or Satan. Okay, and they're supposed to understand that many of those places are actually referring to the archenemy of mankind, the one who is called traditionally Satan. Okay, there's a lot of ways to say this, or there's a lot of evidence in favor of that, which is just sound. It's just from progressive revelation tradition, the church's understanding over time. The other passages in the New Testament from Christ, we know that Satan is real. There is a being called Satan. He is the devil, and that these passages are talking about him. Even Job That's why it's translated in our Bibles as the proper name Satan, when in Hebrew it is saying Hasatan. Okay, so one of the first points in my favor is that there's strata involved here, that there's strata, which are different levels of things going on involved. It's just not so simple. My opponents just speak too simply. And those strata can be referred to as the Hebrew level of things versus the English translation, where on one hand we're talking about the Hebrew, the Hebrew grammar and rules and stuff, and on the other hand we're talking about how it's being translated properly into English. Where in Hebrew, in many places, it's saying Hasatan, the devil or the adversary. It's being translated properly into English, the proper name Satan. And that's fine. But that's just a strata problem. There's a lot that goes into translations. I have a quote here from someone who's at that level. It was handed to me by my acquaintance. Here's a quote from a scholarly commentary on the Old Testament. And I quote, "In rendering Hasatan, the Satan, GK 8477, the NIV has taken the liberty," NIV is a translation, "the NIV has taken the liberty to leave out the definite article, which the Hebrew uses consistently here. The article means," he's referring to chapter 1, verse 6 through 12, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7, I assume it's Genesis. The article means the author wants the root meaning of this title to be emphasized. Whether this represents an earlier stage in the development of the doctrine of Satan is a debatable question." End quote. So we know from him here, there's a doctrine of Satan, capital S. Aha! Wow! Okay, going on with the quote. Both here and in Zechariah 3, verses 1 through 2, a post-exilic prophet, definite article in the context emphasized the accusatory role of the superhuman adversary. The root is not used often in the Old Testament and is usually of human adversaries. By the time of the chronicler, cf. 1 Chronicles 21:1, where no article is used. The Septuagint New Testament, this term may become a proper name for the arch adversary, but there's no data on when the concept originated. Here should be rendered the adversary or the accuser. This is from Job. This quote was from Job, the Expositor's Bible Commentary, Revised Edition, Elmer B. Smith, Tremper Long III, and David E. Garland, General Editors. Okay, so I've looked at that particular passage of the Chronicles, for example, 1 Chronicles 21:1. Here, in the Hebrew language, there is no definite article. It is saying Satan, the real. It is not saying Hasatan, it's saying Satan in Hebrew. So the Hebrew really reads, "And he is standing adversary on Israel, and he is inciting David to counter Israel." And translated, "And Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel." Okay? And that's with a capital S. And moving on here with my points, trying to do this quickly without getting too complicated. These people who make a big deal out of the grammar construct, who are doing that over the Hebrew construct, Hasatan, they are messing with something where it's only dabbling in a topic, and they're not getting the full understanding of what's even within that topic. Okay, in the Hebrew culture and language, naming was tied to characteristics. I see that in the scriptures. Take, for example, the naming of Joseph in Genesis chapter 30, verses 23 to 24. There's meaning within the name given to Joseph. Matthew Henry's whole Bible commentary on Genesis 30, verse 23, it says, "Rachel called her son Joseph, which in Hebrew is akin to two words of a contrary signification. Asa, absolute. He has taken away my reproach, as if the greatest mercy she had in the son was that she had saved her credit. And Jasaph added it, the Lord shall add to me another son, which may be looked upon either as the language of her inordinate desire," etc., etc. So people have names, proper names even, that have a deep meaning in that language. On top of that, the Jews believe, I don't know how many of the Jews, what percentage, particularly those who are Kabbalistic and mystical in their leanings, understanding, tend to believe that God created the Hebrew language before creating the heavens and the earth in Genesis. He had to create the Hebrew alphabet before saying all that he said to create the world, let there be light, etc. Well, how is he going to say let there be light without the language with which to say that? So they think that God created the alphabet first. That means God created the Hebrew language. So then when this word Satan is used in the Old Testament, it is highly possible just of God that it is both saying the devil, the adversary, and it also has an intention and meaning, an adversarial. It is just of God to a certain capacity level. That both are the facts of the matter. That it is both a very more loose word that can be any demon or any adversary, and it is referring to someone who is that much of an adversary. But it has that essence within it. So in the Hebrew language, there's what is called word ontology or word ontology,